JT Crowley is Talking Books. On the show, you'll hear from emerging talent and seasoned veterans from around the world. They'll give you their take on the writing process and how to create the secret sauce of page-turning deliciousness. Let's get into that magical mixture of the art and science of creativity. Here's JT Crowley, author of The Smart Kids, and your podcast host.
Hello, I'm JT Crowley, and today I'm welcoming Mel Harrison from Florida in the United States about his spy novels, the Alex Boyd series. To date, there are 5 books out in the series, the latest being Spies Among Us. His first book, Death in Pakistan, was swiftly followed by The Ambassador is Missing, then Moving Target, and then Terror in Cairo. The background and framework are fictional, as are the characters, but the theme throughout all of the books is based on what he experienced during his 28-year career with the US Department of State, in particular the Diplomatic Security Service. Mel was assigned to various embassies. He was assigned to Saigon, Quito, Rome, London twice, Seoul, and Islamabad. And in those embassies, he worked in the realms of regional security officer. So you can start to see how this brilliant mind of his has worked to create this epic spy thriller series. It's extremely gripping, everybody. Following on from his involvement in the Diplomatic Security Service, Mel focused on corporate security, and the assignments he undertook took him mainly to Latin America and the Middle East. Nowadays, he devotes his time to his writing and book promotions, possibly to get out from under the feet of his wife, Irene, who also had a distinguished career in the US Department of State, working at the same embassies, albeit in a different field of expertise. For the purpose of the podcast, we're going to mainly focus on Mel's latest book, Spies Among Us, but we will touch upon the other 4 books in the series so that you can get a flavour of the whole spy series, the whole Alex Boyd series. But before we do, what I would like to do now is invite Mel onto the show so that he can talk a little about himself and why he wrote the series. Mel, come and join me.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm delighted that you've chosen my series to turn into a podcast. Shall I start with somewhat of my background?
Would you like to tell us a little about yourself? Because these books are amazing, everybody. So tell us a little about yourself and why you wrote this spy thriller series.
Okay, delighted. So after I went to university and I joined the State Department, then in the Office of Security, which years later morphed into the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, or DS for short. And I spent about 28 years in the State Department, a little over half abroad, which is exactly what I wanted. The thrill of living overseas had a massive attraction. I met my wife, Irene, who was in management, an American, in Quito, Ecuador. That was my second tour, her first tour. And we got married and managed to get joint assignments over the years at the various embassies you mentioned. But I decided when I wanted to write novels, I should draw on my experience. Now, as you said, they're all fictionalized, but the stories are close enough to the truth. If I wasn't involved with it, I know of others who were at different posts. I drew on people I knew in the service to create characters, but not necessarily at that embassy. So if there's a character in Death in Pakistan, maybe the person I met at another embassy, and then fictionalized it for better or worse. So I enjoyed writing them. It's a chance to relive places I've been and discuss things, but I also wanted to have a chance to educate the general population about what it's like to be a diplomat, often serving in dangerous situations. Because I know most people don't know much about the State Department, and they know even less about diplomatic security. That's understandable. So I use this as a vehicle to provide a little bit of education while still writing something that's stimulating and exciting for them.
And keeps you out of Irene's way.
Yeah.
Okay, Mel, let's go to Spies Among Us. There are 46 chapters in this book, everybody. So this is a meaty book, and it's packed full of action, which you would expect a spy book to be. So what I want to do is look at 8 of the chapters that stuck out most to me so that the listeners, you listeners, the audience, can get a reasonable concept as to what this book, what these series are about. So let's go to chapter 1, The Rendezvous, which is set in Oxfordshire, England. In fact, most, if not all of this book is set in the UK. No doubt you drew upon your own experiences when you were at the US Embassy in London. Now, the scene, to start off with, it starts off with April Scott pacing around a hotel room in Oxfordshire. She's nervous about her forthcoming meeting with Lars Nielsen, her contact. She has in her old plaid skirt a small SD card. What's on that card? But so she fears the information on the drive is all Lars wants, despite him telling her he loves her. Is he romantically using her to obtain the secret information she's been passing him, or does he genuinely care for her? So the book starts off with a complex love conundrum. April has a color-coded card that indicates she has access to top secret information, as did all political officers in her embassy section. So, Mel, my question really is, why did you kickstart the book off in this fashion? A touch of unrequited romance with passing secret details. And why the character Lars, the Swedish owner of an electronic company, an international electronics company? Is this about the UK and the Swedish governments throwing the Russian influence in Northern Europe?
Okay, that's a good question. Most thrillers start by introducing your protagonist, but not all. Indeed, some great books don't introduce the protagonist until the second or third chapter. I believe that thrillers should not only be about plot, but about characters. I want Lars Nielsen to be real stars in the book, even though they're, quote, bad guys. I want to introduce them and develop their personality early on. They'll continue through the entire book. April, as the readers get into the book, will find that she's not very experienced in life with love affairs. She's in her late 30s. She hasn't had many boyfriends. So the fact that Lars has endeared himself to her is vital to her. She's upset in the opening scene because she wants to take this to the next level. She wants to get married. And she's also uncomfortable passing top secret to Lars. She doesn't know yet that he's a Russian spy. He's what they call an illegal, like a mole. He's undeclared. He's been placed into the UK with a Swedish cover because he's a skilled linguist, and he spent a number of years growing up in Sweden. He was recruited by the KGB as a youngster with the sole purpose of being activated at some point in the future. In this case, it was an opportunity for him to pair up with April Scott, who we met in London. And the KGB realized early on she has access to a lot of top secret material. So he's got the scam going is that he's Swedish and that they are also worried about Soviet efforts to move against the West. And so the information she provides is supposedly just to reaffirm what the Swedish government, his friends in the Swedish government, already know. She's uncomfortable with this and probably in her heart realizes this can't be exactly so. In one point, even first chapter even mentions, surely your diplomats in Washington can go to the State Department or the White House and confirm what's what with the U.S. relations towards Russia, towards Sweden, etc. But so now she's kind of at an emotional breaking point. She's brought the material once again on the flash card, the thumb drive, but she wants more of a commitment from Lars. So it's a moving chapter, very moving chapter for her. And it was a chance for me to introduce two key characters early on.
I thought it was a wonderful chapter, a bit of a spy book and a bit of romance here as well. Mel, I want to go on to now chapter 3. This is a powerful chapter, and you headed it up, The Offer. And for me, the opening scene got my attention. Like, an opening scene in any chapter should grab somebody's attention. We're in Washington, D.C. Alex is meeting with Jim Riley. Now, Jim Riley is the Director of Diplomatic Security, State Department. And they're talking about the newly appointed Undersecretary of State for Management, Dennis Hager. Where does his loyalties lie? Now, that's a good question, everybody. The New York Times has put out a story that the Russians have arrested one of their own SVR officers, and SVR is the modern version of the KGB, claiming he was a CIA spy. This is the second arrest this year, and it's only March. Who was behind the leak to the paper? A viper with a personal axe to grind? Mel, this is a very, very important chapter, for you as a writer and for Alex, the protagonist, because here comes Alex, the main character here. Tell us more about this chapter.
Okay, it sets the stage for the relationship between Alex Boyd, my protagonist, and Jim Riley, as you said, the director. But Jim was Alex's boss in Pakistan, which was in the very first book, Death in Pakistan, when there was a huge terrorist attack on the embassy. They've remained close over the years. And indeed, in the second book, The Ambassador is Missing, Riley comes to his political aid when he runs afoul of embassy management. So I'm showing a continuing relationship. And in this book, we see through Alex's eyes that Jim is physically deteriorating. His health is no longer good, but his mind is still sharp. And he's definitely worried about Soviet espionage. We learned that the Russians know what our intelligence services in the West have stolen from them. And we know this ourselves. So the fact that they're able to some of the CIA's agents in Moscow is deeply troubling. This indicates a tremendous leak. If not knowing exactly who the spies are in the SVR, at least the Russians have been smart enough. They've got enough information to put two and two together and narrow it down. So in this case, Riley is deeply upset. He'll be going to a meeting later. He alludes to that in chapter 3, and he hopes to learn more about it. Riley is concerned about his friend Jim. He's very concerned and wants to be supportive in any way that he can. He's equally concerned about the allegations against Dennis Hager. In the prior chapter 2, I've outlined what those allegations are. They're not proven. And unfortunately, in the real world, that's often the case. There are rumors, there's innuendo, you get partial stories. Things are never clear. And unlike in television shows where everything's wrapped up in an hour, in the real world, it can take months or years to narrow down these espionage threats. So that's where we go. Go
Absolutely.
ahead.
I mean, in any spy or espionage scenario, it's always murky waters.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
Let's go to chapter 11, Mel. First impressions. Mel, I found this chapter absolutely absorbing. We've got Alex, the main character, and his wife, Rachel, who's a political counsellor at the US Embassy in London. And they are meeting and introducing themselves to the staff at the embassy in London. Security around the embassy is tight, as a lot of terrorists know exactly where the embassy is, where it's located. The ambassador tends to be a political appointment and are generally people of substantial wealth and political influence. But it's the deputy chief of mission, picked carefully by the Department of State, who really does run the show behind the scenes. Now, this chapter is giving us an idealistic eye view of the day-to-day operational activities of the embassy, the complex logistics, so to speak. For you, Mel, was this an important chapter to support the storyline as it unfolds?
Yeah, John, I think it is. And again, it's an opportunity to let the readers know a little bit about the State Department. In this case, we're just a few months into a new administration, a new presidency. So he doesn't have all his political appointees named yet, including the American ambassador to the UK. So the deputy chief of mission, Bainbridge Wellington, has an even greater responsibility. And he's been there for a number of years. I also set the stage with Rachel being the political counselor. That's basically the number 3 position in the embassy. But without an ambassador, she's now number 2. I called it first impressions because when we start a new job, any of us, we all know that first impressions are important. And in the Foreign Service, you're transferring every few years. So despite what your corridor reputation may be, you have a real chance, for better or worse, of making an impression on day one. And hopefully it'll be a good one, because if you make a mediocre or bad impression, that's going to stick around for a while until you have a chance to prove yourself. So both Rachel and Alex are dressed to the nines. They show up, they're sharp. They meet the challenge of not only meeting.
And of course, first impressions always count. That's what they say. And what you don't realize, everybody, is that before Alex and Rachel turn up at the embassy, there's a little bed fanatics going on between the two of them. A little bedside play, and we're not going there. Go and read the book. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's have a little play in bed, and then let's get dressed up and go.
The romance
the
between
staff.
Rachel.
Absolutely. Mel, chapter 21, red flag. For me, this is a very, very important chapter. Now, this is a short chapter, and here we see Rachel, Alex's wife, temporarily taking on the role as the deputy chief of mission, as you've already said. So she's now second in charge at the embassy. But that's not the main play in this chapter, is it? What for me is the main issue is Anna Battle's doubts about Lars Nilsson. Is he Swedish? He seems to know very little about Swedish politics the other night. So as the CIA station chief, and she would be third in command in the embassy, she raises a red flag against him, and she wants Alex, who's in security and regional security officer, to covertly investigate without raising any alarms. It's an intriguing little storyline, and it's got a lot to it, hasn't it?
It does. And the chapter shows, along with other chapters where Alex interacts with the CIA, that a mission overseas is really a team effort. I hate reading other novels where there's one protagonist who literally saves the world by himself. My experience is that rarely happens. So
teamwork.
Alex is working. Yeah. So Alex is indeed State Department. That's what diplomatic security is all about. It's where they're housed. But any regional security officer like Alex has to have a very good relationship with the CIA station that's in the embassy. And in London, it's a large one, as you might expect. The US and the UK have probably the closest relationship imaginable. So we share a lot of information and work together closely. Anna Battles, not really in the chain of command. You mentioned she was third. It's a powerful position. I mean, she's a very experienced officer, but the CIA is its entity, but they come under the authority of the ambassador and deputy chief of mission. So Anna is very experienced. Battles is her married name. Her maiden name is Lundquist. And she comes from a Swedish family, although she was born in America, as did were her parents. Grew up in Minnesota, which has got a lot of Swedes. So from time to time, they spoke Swedish at home. And she did a junior year abroad in Stockholm. And then one of her early assignments with the CIA was in Stockholm. So she's quite a linguist. She speaks other languages. So at a cocktail party talking to Lars Nielsen, she detects some grammatical errors, which shouldn't happen to a native Swede. She then kind of tests the waters a little bit and mentions some historical, political, and economic information. And she thinks his answers are kind of perfunctory, more like textbook answers than personal answers of someone who's a businessman having lived through a socialist period of government in Sweden, which was the 60s, 70s. At any rate, her antennae are up. So she mentions it to Alex. Well, because Lars is getting married to April Scott, a foreign service officer, he has to have a background investigation done by the State Department. That's not negotiable. Anytime an officer with a clearance marries a foreigner, there's a background investigation. The person knows it, they cooperate, they fill out the forms. So Anna's worried that maybe Lars isn't all he's claiming to be. And she mentions it to Alex because it's the State Department that does the clearance. So that's the important part. This is really the first time in the book that people are focusing on Lars and wondering, is he who he claims to be?
Absolutely. But let's get the readers to find out for themselves.
Yes.
Let's go to the chapter, The Sting. Now, I get the feeling that Alex and his team, and they've already said, anybody who operates in the diplomatic service, it's not just a one-man show, it's a team. And here we emphasize the team. So we get the feeling that Alex and his team at the US Embassy in London are on to April and Lars. Little romantic dalliances at various points across the English landscape. So there's an eavesdropping exercise done on their phone calls with a setup information as an interesting ploy. Mel, would you care to embellish on this idea? They've thrown a little trap here, haven't they? And that was quite deliberately done. What's your viewpoint on this?
Yes, exactly. Well, the secret to eventually making an arrest, to finding out who's leaking the information, is you want to catch them in the act if you can. I mean, sometimes you can do it electronically, but sometimes you want to capture people in face-to-face meetings. So they basically throw in some bogus information with tidbits of reality, give it a high clearance, and they make sure that April Scott sees it on the assumption that it's such good information, she'll pass it on to Lars. And indeed, the trap is sprung. She does. She calls him, and they arrange to meet. And she's got her, again, another thumb drive, which she's copied the information from a State Department cable, and she's going to pass it to him. This is a classic scene, as you said, of cooperation. When I was in London, I was there twice for 3 years each, 3 years in the 80s, 3 in the 90s.
It was so good you came back.
You're not kidding.
It was so good, everybody, he came back.
I could live there full time. Yeah, it's wonderful.
I've thrown you now.
Yeah. Some of my best contacts, my closest relations, were with Special Branch. Of course, Special Branch now has been folded into the Counterterrorism Branch. But back then, and back when I set the book, they were still a separate entity. And, Special Branch's remit is counterintelligence, counterterrorism, and they're very good at it. So I have the scene here where they're following Lars and they're following April, and it's all coordinated with the American Embassy, who in turn has coordinated with Washington. So we're all working on the same page. But in this scene, ultimately, it's down to the British to do the work. I mean, Alex can't appear when they're about to make the arrest because April and Lars know him. They recognize his face. He has
Absolutely.
to keep his distance. And besides, he's an American in the embassy. He has no authority to arrest anybody in Britain. So it's down to our partners, our cousins. And the Special Branch does an excellent job of keeping tabs on the two of them. Alex is at Scotland Yard, in this case, along with the FBI attaché at the embassy, who has only a very minor role to play up to this point. But I do bring him in because it's realistic. And sure enough, they spring the trap, and they do so in a wonderful real pub. In fact, let me mention, if you can indulge me, in the 5 books, I have a lot of restaurant scenes.
You do.
They're all real restaurants, and my wife and I have eaten in all those restaurants, and every meal that Alex and Rachel eat, we've had there.
You've had.
At that restaurant.
I wondered that. I wondered. Can we go to chapter 36, Mel? Because the plot really does thicken here. And it's headed up Another Traitor. Because this is where it's called Spies Among Us. There's more than one, everybody. Anna Battles and Alex spread their suspicious nets further afield. They have their beady eyes on Washington for more traitors, or should I say suspicious traitors. Dennis Hager, the powerful Undersecretary of Management, is still under the radar. But now so is Wakefield Summers. Now, Wakefield Summers, everybody, is the Deputy Secretary of State. And with his dubious background, did the Russians or the East German Stasi know about his misgivings from the past and have blackmailed him to spy for them? You've now got a twist in this plot. Why? Why have you done this? What's going on here?
I deliberately wanted to make it complicated. I didn't want merely a linear plot where we only are dealing with April Scott. So if you think back to the beginning of the book, we have two issues. One, the theft of top secret information from the U.S. and NATO, but two, the arrest of CIA spies working within the SVR, the Soviet intelligence service, in Moscow. Now, there's no way that April Scott could know who those people are in Moscow. In fact, even the CIA station in London has no way of knowing who these people are, the CIA spies in Moscow. So that information has to be coming from someplace else. So we have two parallel stories that come together in the end. So I've created a scene where, in this case, we're focusing on Wakefield Summers because he has a background in the CIA and he has a background
from his past.
A personal problem that is a very blackmailable problem.
So let's keep it out and let people read it for themselves. I found the last chapter we're going to go to, Russian Response, and this is you, Mel, imagination at your best. And this chapter is simply breathtaking. You know, with April and Lars arrested at the Royal Standard pub outside of London, Wakefield Summers is arrested by the FBI following his dead drop use to inform Nikolai Petrov, his contact, an SAV operative in the Russian embassy in Washington. Russian executions on foreign soils we're talking about, Putin's impatience with traitors. Did you enjoy composing this scene? Spill the beans here.
I enjoyed every bit of it.
I thought you did.
As you know, reading it, I've developed not only the American characters, but the Russian characters too. I give them a little legend, a little background, because we're all human. Some are evil, but then some are good guys. But I think it's important not to create plastic characters. That's just too easy, and it's not hard work as a writer to do, but it's inept work.
Yes.
So I created not only Lars Nilsson, but the senior SVR officers in London. And then I even have some background with the two SVR assassins who are really Spetsnaz army guys on loan to the SVR.
Okay, let's go to these guys, these SVR guys, because this is chapter 44, Life or Death. The safe house, the attack, Rachel's defense against the Russian killers. This is you at your best here, isn't it?
Thank you. So I created...
This is you at your best.
I've created Sergei and Victor. These are the two assassins in the Russian army. And because they're in Spetsnaz, they're required to learn foreign languages. In this case, they both speak passable English and pretty good Lithuanian. So they come to the UK as Lithuanians with passports, etc. And the goal is to kill Lars Nilsson as a message to other Russian spies. Do not defect. Do not compromise yourself. And I based this on what Putin has ordered. You had Skripal, who was attacked in Salisbury with polonium, the poison, and Litvinenko, who was killed. He was poisoned. Skripal was Novichok, my mistake. Litvinenko, polonium in the Millennium Hotel, Grosvenor Square, right across from the embassy, and they dropped the radioactive material in his tea. So the Russians are very vicious when it comes to retaliating. And frankly, they just don't seem to care about collateral damage.
Or the fallout. No.
The Brits who just might be there. And in fact, in the Salisbury event, there were a lot of Brits who were seriously ill. I think one died from the poisoning. So the fact that they're going to go after Lars and he's in a British safe house, maybe the safe house is a bit of a stretch, but they would at least consider it. And so in this case, I have them deciding to do it. It's that important to Putin that they kill him and send the message.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mel, I think we've given the listeners enough of a tease, a bit of a flavour of your fifth book in, the Alex Boyd series. Can we briefly look at the others?
Sure.
Starting off with the fourth book in this series, Terror in Cairo. Now, in your description, you talk about a vicious terrorist organisation determined to thwart a Middle East conference in Cairo, attempting to stop any chance of a successful conference outcome involving peace with Israel. Alex Boyd and his diplomatic service colleagues try to stop waves of bloody attacks. Alex is tasked with identifying the leaders of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, EIJ, by leading a team of US Navy SEALs into the harsh deserts of Libya to terminate them. Briefly tell us about this book.
Okay, I should first put it in context a little bit. Everybody knows that the Secret Service protects the president and vice president. What most people don't know is diplomatic security protects the Secretary of State and a lot of visiting VIPs. If the Prime Minister of the UK came to America, Secret Service would protect he or she. But if the Foreign Secretary came and needed protection, that would be diplomatic security, PS. So we have a lot of skills in protecting people at conferences, and that's what Terror in Cairo begins. The Middle East Peace Conference, the secretaries there, we have U.S. congressmen and senators as part of the delegation. EIJ, Egyptian Islamic Jihad, is a real group. It exists. And they decide they're not going to tolerate a conference that might result in peace with Israel. It's their foe, and they just have to. So they attack the conference. They attack this conference center. They attack the hotels. There were repeated attacks. So Alex and his colleagues who are protecting the delegation have to work with the Egyptian police in fighting off these waves of attacks. The scenario I've set up, the shootouts, it's based on the training that we've all had in diplomatic security. And I think it's pretty true to form. And again, you work as a team. As you know from the chapter, I don't have Alex defeating 18 terrorists all at once. He's got colleagues. The Egyptians are involved, but there are casualties, a lot of civilian casualties. Moving on, you mentioned Alex going into the desert with the SEALs. What I need to mention is when Alex was a child, his father was a CIA station chief, and he was assigned to Cairo, where Alex spent 4 years as a young teenager. As a result, Alex speaks Arabic. When he joined the U.S. Navy before the State Department, he was in intelligence because of his Arabic language skills, and he was assigned to a SEAL unit. Now, Alex is not a Navy SEAL. He's clear about that. But he does speak Arabic. He's got fighting skills. And so when the president decides we need to retaliate for this EIJ attack on the American delegation, as well as the other delegations in Cairo, we're going to go into Libya, where EIJ has the headquarters, and we're going to kill them. Because of their Alex's language skills and the fact that he was there in Cairo, knows a lot about EIJ, they asked him to accompany the SEALs as an intelligence officer. But when you're in the thick of things, the enemy doesn't differentiate between intel and a shooter. And Alex has to fight to defend his life.
Let's go to the third book in this series, Moving Target. Now, Alex and his wife, Rachel Smith, operate in Paris, having been given the opportunity. Plans, however, best laid plans never go according to plan. Their lives are at risk due to a Sicilian mafia leader. Alex's boss and wife, Henry and Giselle Ducat, go missing. Are they kidnapped or are they on the run? Fascinating plot.
Thank you. This is different. I decided to kind of stretch myself, but at the same time free myself. In the first two books, I have Alex in a traditional setting, an embassy. So there are constraints. There are real meetings, there are real regulations, a real established chain of command. And I said, you know what? Some of my readers are telling me They like everything I've written, but maybe I need to get away from the embassy structure a little bit. So I put them on both leave without pay. They have fabulous job offers in Paris. Alex working for the wealthiest investment banker in France. Rachel works for his wife, who runs her own fashion house. Since they're both reasonably fluent in French, this is a real opportunity. They get the opportunity because by total coincidence, they're on their honeymoon. Sorry, they're on their anniversary, 1-year anniversary. And they saved this investment banker's life from an armed attack. Only later did they find out this was not a one-off.
Oh, so here we go again. You see, everybody got a little bit of romance twisted in here.
I think you like the romantic sex scenes I've written.
Ooh, shh. The second book in this series, Mel, The Ambassador is Missing. This story takes place in Rome when you've been to Rome. An easy assignment, you might think, initially, particularly after the events in Pakistan and the book where Alex nearly loses his life. The assignment, however, transpires to be something more sinister, doesn't it?
Indeed, it does. While the ambassador is a great guy, he's a political appointee, and he met Alex in Washington when Alex was studying Italian, and the ambassador was waiting for his confirmation hearings. So they bonded. But when Alex arrives in Rome, he finds out that his boss, the deputy chief of mission, is a very good friend of the political counselor in the first book, Death in Pakistan. He hates Alex's guts before he's even met him because he blames Alex for deep-sixing the career of his good friend from Pakistan. They had served together in Vienna. And so he's watching Alex very carefully and really looking for an excuse to get rid of Alex. Meanwhile, the ambassador, a political appointee, isn't used to all this security. And like all political appointees, has a hard time accepting it. He wants more freedom. He wants to get away, at least on the weekends. So the deputy chief of mission, Alden Chandler, connives with the management counselor to give him that freedom. They give him an embassy car he can drive. The ambassador lies to his Italian police bodyguards, tells him he's not going anywhere on the weekend, and they sneak him out of the house so he can go out into the Italian countryside. Of course, it backfires, and he gets kidnapped by the New Red Brigade, which was a real organization, a follow-up to the original Red Brigade, typical Marxist organization. So Alex is kind of left out in the wilderness, trying to get the ambassador back, works with his very good Italian contacts, but he's got the DCM looking over his shoulder every second, hoping Alex will make a faux pas so he can kick him out of the country. Complicating this is the FBI comes in seeking glory and wanting to claim credit, but they're out of their depth in dealing in Italy and trying to get the ambassador back.
There you go. Yeah. Let's go to the first book in this series. Now, Mel and I had a little bit of a laugh about this, everybody, because when we were talking about this book, I accidentally said Death in Paradise. Now, of course, Death in Paradise is a TV program, and we laugh about it. So I said, I'm going to call it Death in Paradise. But in actual fact, the first book is Death in Pakistan. And I surmise that you gleaned so much of the storyline here from your experience in your, when you're in Islamabad, the US Embassy in Pakistan. In the description, you have Alex as the Deputy Regional Security Officer. Now, Alex and Rachel are not married here in this first book. She's a press officer, she's an accomplished athlete, and an intellectual powerhouse. The embassy comes under attack, and Alex's job is there to protect the staff and the embassy. Can you very, very briefly, Mel, tell us about this first book?
Yeah, as you noted, I based it not only on some of my personal experience, but on a very tragic event that happened 10 years before I got there. In 1970, I set this book, the beginning of the series, in the early 1990s. Just arbitrarily decided to do that. But in 1979, a mob of 5,000 people attacked the American embassy. The cause was the Grand Mosque in Mecca had actually been overrun by terrorists. Now, this had to do with the Sunni-Shia rivalry, and Iran was behind it on the Shia side. But the Russians were very clever. You might remember they were still, they were in Afghanistan. They put out on their disinformation service that the American CIA had invaded the Grand Mosque. Totally false. So our embassy was burned down. We had 4 people killed, including 2 local employees, a U.S. Marine and a military man in our mission. Flash forward to 1989, and I was there, and Salman Rushdie was about to publish Satanic Verses in America. Now, the British had been dealing with Rushdie and protecting him for a number of years already in the UK. But this was the first time the book was going to appear in America. The extreme religious fanatics in Pakistan wouldn't have any of that. And they decided they were going to give us a petition protesting it, and it would be a massive demonstration, about 8,000 people. Well, we found out about a week before this. And we realized there was a 50-50 chance from intelligence that this would turn violent, which it did. But we decided, let's accept the petition. Maybe we can diffuse this. So we closed the embassy for the day. We only had our emergency action committee, a small group in the embassy, but the petition was being delivered across town to the American Center. That's our cultural center. And that's where I was, to accept this petition along with a few of our cultural center employees. And we had lots of extra police and guards that day. At any rate, it all turned to hell. They attacked the center. This went on for hours, broke all the windows, burned the cars in the parking lot. And it caught our attention. We were busy. So I based it on that. But I decided that a riot was not enough for my book. So I have a rogue element within the Pakistan Intelligence Service, ISI, behind this. And what they really want to do is attack the embassy with terrorists. Why do they want to do that? Because this colonel, who's the head of the rogue element, holds us responsible for not backing Pakistan in the 71 Pakistan-India war. We had the resources in the Indian Ocean, but so did the Russians. And both sides exercised some restraint. We faced down each other. In the case of the U.S., we have a real carrier battle group there. But that's not good enough for this colonel, ISI colonel. So he wants to teach America. So I should put it in context. When the book opens up, we are increasing our relationship with India at the cost of Pakistan. We're giving them military aid and assistance and cutting Pakistan's. I got to tell you, this is a real issue all the time, still is to this day, because in Pakistan, you don't always have a democracy. You frequently have dictatorships. And when the army is running the country, back in Washington, elements in Congress are not happy with giving aid to Pakistan. Meanwhile, India, for almost its entire existence, has been a democracy. So the setting is real. The conflict, political conflict, is real. The riots have really occurred. And I set this up. And also, I should say, you mentioned some of Rachel's background. When I created her, knowing I would have she and Alex through the entire series, I didn't want to create a damsel in distress. She's tall. She's got good muscles. She's an athlete like Alex. Both are really intellectually strong. And Rachel knows some martial arts from her days in Hong Kong and Beijing. And she's an aggressive female. She knows what she likes. She can fight. And I decided to throw her into harm's way in several of the books. And she has to get her way out of it. It's not to say Alex doesn't come to help her many times, but she can hold her own.
She can hold her own.
I think the female Raiders like that.
Absolutely. Mel, the series, the Alex Boyd series, is fascinating. And I hope everybody that having listened to what Mel has been talking about and their podcast, you can get the feel that this whole series, this Alex Boyd series, is action-packed. It's a thriller, and it's drawn on a lot of experiences from Mel's own stays in the various embassies that he's worked at. Are there any more books coming down the line, Mel? In this series?
I have 2 or 3 books in mind. One I wrote about a quarter of, but I switched to another one. The one I'm working on now, I'm doing it slowly because I'm dealing more with promotion now than writing, but it's set in New Orleans. This will be my only domestic setting. Ooh. And it's a murder of someone that worked for Rachel in Washington. And Alex and Rachel are there to help the New Orleans police solve the murder and bring the murderer to justice. But some of the others are overseas again.
Oh, can't wait to see those.
In fact, we may be in London.
Oh, you love London.
I do.
Alex, sorry, you're not Alex. The character's Alex. Mel, where can people get your books from?
You can go to Amazon.com. They're available in both paperback and the e-reader version, Kindle version, at different price settings. So whichever version you like, it's available.
Okay. There you go, everybody. Mel Harrison, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to me about your brilliant series, the Alex Boyd series, the 5 books, in particular, Spies Among Us, the one you brought out earlier on this year. I'm JT Crowley. Thanks for listening, watching, wherever you're in the world. So until next time, stay safe.